In this video, we'll look at cards and how to create cards with various classes. And essentially a card is a multifunctional box inside of which we can place our content. It's a replacement for two features that have been eliminated that were in version 3 and are no longer in version 4. One was a panel, and a panel, as you can see, a very basic example, was just a call out section. It just basically had a border with rounded corners around any of your content. It also seemed to have a little drop shadow to make it pop off the page just a tiny bit. You can see they also had a version that had a heading, or a title rather. And then they have versions with footers, and then they have contextual color alternatives where you have the outline and the header panel is colored as well as the text in one of several different of our contextual colors that we're familiar with: primary, success, info, warning, danger, and so on. All right, so the panel was one component that was dropped in version 4. The other one was wells, and a well is like a panel except it has more of an inset look. So the well has a dark background. You can see the top has a very, very light drop shadow that gives it that impression of being just 1 or 2 pixels dropped under the page. And really there weren't a whole lot of options, just a large and a small well. But at any rate, we have instead cards, and a card will has really a lot more built-in functionality, a number of classes that support it. It will provide kind of out of the box that flat web design look where you have an image at the top, some title and description in a middle area, and then at the bottom maybe a button or some sort of footer. And I'm sure after I show you a couple of examples, you'll say, oh yeah, I've seen that before on various websites. So cards take up the entire width of the given cell that they're in or the container that they're in, and they can have a number of different optional parts. And you can have multiple of these in any given card that you create. So there's usually either a image at the top called an image cap or header text. You can also have in a middle section a number of card blocks. So a card block is just a section with content inside of it. And it can have a title and a subtitle styled up to look like a card, text, again, styled up to look like it belongs inside the card. And then you can also have bottom areas like a bottom image cap. So another image at the very bottom. You could have footer text in the bottom area, and we'll probably learn about a couple of other little variants on these as well as we go through this. You can see that I've already started by creating a HTML page called cardclasses.html with our template copied into it. And so let's go ahead and get started here. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is let me work on the template a little bit, because I know I'm going to need quite a few rows with quite a few number of cells. So let's start with 3 rows that have 4 cells with 3 columns each. And then I think I'll need a couple with just 12. And we'll go from there and see what else we need. Okay, so to start off with, let's create the most basic card that we can possibly think of. So I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to give that div a class called card. And then inside of here, pretty much anything goes. There are all those different components that are optional. Let's start by just creating an image. Class equals card image top. Okay, and then we'll set the source equal to something we're familiar with here, placehold.it/200 by 100, and then what we'll also do then is create a card block, which is a div area that has text on the inside. So we'll set class equals card block. And then inside of here, we can create like an H4 and say this is the card title. We'll create some text. This is just some lorem ipsum text. Here, let me just grab some content and paste it in there. And then We can add a button inside of here as well. So let's do a href equals whatever, and then class equals btn primary, and we'll say button. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, there are a number of these little helper classes, and we'll look at them in more detail in just a moment, but I can add a class to make this title, for example, look like it should be inside of one of these cards. So we'll go a card title, for example, and this text, we can make it look like it belongs inside of one of these cards. Card text, whoops, text, T-X-T, all right. And we'll even find that there's a one for hyperlinks, although we used a button in this case. So now let's look at what we have so far. We have our image cap, we have our card block, pretty simple version. All right, and you can see that it doesn't quite take up enough space. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to change this just a little bit because I wasn't entirely sure of the dimensions. And what I'm going to do also, if I can remember to do this for the rest of the time here, is just use that image fluid, which will make sure the image is large enough to fit the container. All right, so here, let's see what we got this time. All right, that looks a little bit better. Okay. All right, and so like I said, there's probably a dozen variations on this idea. Let's just continue and copy what we have and just change it up in a bunch of different ways. So here I'm going to take this original card, paste it in that second cell. And this time, what I want to do is instead of using an image at the very top, I'm going to use I'm going to create what's called a card header. And so you'll see that this will give us a nice background color for our card, and a larger font. Then instead of the image, we have, text that we can add in here. Okay, very cool. And while we're in this card, just to kind of illustrate, in addition to the card title and card text, there's also a card subtitle. And so we can put some subtitle text here for the card. And in fact, here again, a text muted fits nicely. All right. So just right there below the title, might need a little bit of little margin between the two, but that's all right. Can always work on that later. And then let's remove this button and let's add links instead. So ahref, wherever, doesn't matter. And then class equals, and here we have a card link. So let's go this link 1 and link 2. All right. So again, all of these, the header, the title, subtitle, text, links, these are all formatted to work nicely inside of cards. All right. Let's take a look at a version of our first card that we created. And instead of, or in addition to the card top, let's create a card, or rather a image at the bottom. So there's a card image top and there is a card image bottom. So let's look at that. All right. Very cool. Don't know why I need that, but again, I can do it. I can also get pretty creative with the content inside of the card itself, so I can combine the image and the card block into one by doing what's called an image overlay. And so here what I'll do is start by defining a card. So let's go class equals card. And then inside of here, we'll create an image. So image class equals card image. Notice I'm not going to use bottom or top. I'm just going to use image. And I'm going to set the source equal to something we'll come back to in just a moment. Because I'm going to use a special feature of place hold it that'll allow me to set the color background of the image. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. And then let's go ahead and then create the card block. Remember, that's where all the interesting content's at. So class equals, instead, I'm not going to call it card block. I'm actually going to call it card image overlay. So this is the content I want to be laid on top of the card image. And so here I can put, you know, pretty much anything. And I'll just copy some text I've got here. Pop it in here, like so. All right, now let's go ahead and choose to go http:// placehold.it, and let's go 300, but I'm not going to specify a height, so that'll make it 300 by 300. I'm going to specify a background color in terms of hex. So I happen to know that D35400 is like this orange color, and I can also specify so that's the background color for the image. I can specify the foreground color of the image as well. I could use white, or there's actually this variation on white that I like, F0, ECF0F1. And then I can also, in a query string parameter, set the text equal to, and I can set this to whatever I want. And we'll just call this a background image. Okay. Plus image. The plus gives us a space between the two. All right, and so I think what I'm also going to need to do then is set the image fluid, although I didn't have it in my example code that I'm looking at here. Let's see what we get here this time. All right, so interesting. You see how we get the a black font and a grayed out font on top of an orange image. So that's how, and did you notice the image too? It had the text in it, albeit in a very small font, background image. I can just eliminate that if I don't need it. But I also want to point out the fact that you can, if you don't like the black color for the text, you can choose to set the card inverse, which will make use white fonts instead, or white for color. So here you go. So that's pretty cool. And, you know, in this case, all I really wanted to do was just show a color image. I could use any image. But what if I just wanted to use a color in the background? I can use contextual colors. So in this case, I'm just going to copy and paste in this example because I'm getting tired of typing. And I think you're probably getting tired of watching me type. So in this case, all I'm doing is creating a card. I'm going to say, give me the card background color of success. Now, there are several different colors, danger and danger outline. There's info and info outline. There's primary and primary outline, secondary and secondary outline, right? Or just secondary outline. Success outline, and warning outline. All right, so I think we just had success, right? And then I want everything to be centered inside of my card. And then I'm also adding the card inverse because I want white text on this, what is it going to be, green background. And then everything else pretty much is the same, but notice that I have yet another class, this one specifically for block quotes. And I'll use this HTML5 cite in a footer to cite the source of that particular block quote. So let's take a look at this one. And here we have a nice card, nicely styled, green background, white text. Looks pretty cool. Okay, very nice. Okay, so now let's talk about groupings of cards. And I guess I don't need this after all. And so there's two ways to group your cards together, and one is called a card group. And so what this will do is create one row of cards. In this case, we're going to put 3 cards in that row. So here I'm just going to create a real cell of 12 columns. And inside of that, I'm going to create a card group. And the card group will have 3 cards defined inside of it. So this card group will ensure that the heights of those 3 cards are the same, irregardless of the content that's inside of them. So it'll give them some consistency. Also, each of those cards will be butted up against each other. So let's take a look at what this looks like. And in the extra large, it doesn't look so great because I probably should have used a 400 instead of a 300. And fortunately, though, since I used the responsive tag, you can see that I get the desired effect, which are 3 images of the same size, only because I chose 3 of the same size images. But the bigger story here is that the heights of these cards are the same, despite the fact that the cards have different amounts of content in each one of them. And notice that they're connected together, they're kind of butted up against each other. So contrast that card group, which we'd simply just create 3 cards and then wrap them in a div with a classical card group. Contrast that to what are called card decks. And so the card deck is interesting. And before I actually do this, I need one more of these. So let's put that there. Okay. So the card deck's interesting because it's almost identical to the card group, but the difference is that you'll see the cards are not attached to each other. So you see the difference between the card group and the card deck. And yet each of the cards are still the same height. All right. So there's a little more margin in between them. And so this is something I'm sure you've seen, whether it's in something like a pricing table or courses or individual articles that have a featured image on each of them. And they all kind of look very nice in like a grid format. There's also another new popular style called masonry that you'll see often. And you can use cards to create that masonry effect. Just back up one quick second. I'm sorry I didn't explain this. In addition to creating 3 individual cards, you have to wrap them in 2 divs. First of all, the card deck and then a card deck wrapper. All right. So just wanted to point that out, that's pretty much the only difference between the card group and the card deck is that you need to wrap it with 2 divs. One's a wrapper and then the deck and then the individual cards. All right, moving on now. Talking about masonry. And so we'll create columns of cards. And these columns are called card columns, and they create this typography effect called masonry. So we'll see it here at the very bottom where you have all of these different sized images. I probably could have made these a little bit larger to fit correctly, but at any rate, you can see how they all kind of just line up in columns, and they're kind of a little bit more random. And I've seen this in blog posts and more trendy portfolios for photographers and stuff like that. And it shows a mixture of styles aligning to the right, center alignment, backgrounds, images, the whole sort here in this example that I pulled directly from Bootstrap's help. And that's pretty much all I have to say about cards. Very flexible. You can do a lot with these, and we can implement some of the most popular styles currently in web development using cards. So I think that's why they made the switch and got rid of the wells and the panels, because the new cards allow us to duplicate the style that we'll see most frequently in 2016. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap this up, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.